The environment is being used for a power struggle. The environment is being used for centralized government. The environment is being used to make a one world government. That we are facing a battle against those that want to destroy a great United States of America.
You know, when I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
Is the population bomb, acid rain, the ozone hole, global cooling, you name it. The global warming scare has longer legs because it's got more money.
That also gives climate alarmists a reason to squash dissent.
The climate change deniers suggest there's still a debate over the science. There is not.
I bought what they were saying.
Judith Curry is a climate scientist at Georgia Tech. She once agreed with the scaremongers.
What changed?
Well, ClimateGate.
Emails reveal a plot among the world's top climate scientists.
A group of esteemed scientists were strategizing to squash their opponents. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Why should I believe this instead of my own judgment? What scientists actually agree on is a very narrow slice of things. Yes, temperatures have been increasing overall for the last several hundred years.
No doubt.
And that carbon dioxide does act to warm the planet. But there's no agreement as to whether warming is dangerous or not.
For saying that,
you were one of the targets of the congressman saying, show us where you get your money.
Yeah. I was one of the 7.
7 climate skeptics were branded heretics in order to reveal all their sources of funds. Curry abandoned science.
This is after praising me and pushing me a few years ago as, the prestigious
Well, you
scientist
have wrong
and whatever.
opinions now.
Yeah, I was trying to be honest as a scientist. It was very unpopular with a lot of my colleagues. They were trying to squash people who disagreed with them.
And they've succeeded.
I get emails from people all the time who wish they could speak out.
What are they worried about?
Losing their jobs?
It's dangerous to dissent when climate change is something politicians address with religious zeal.
quickest way is that you get leaders into the White House and around the president in the White House and in these departments that are absolutely determined to give the swamp less to work with and to reset the rules of the road. Because, by the way, the best way you can cut down on this is to have fewer regulations, have fewer things that they can cause mischief with. And on this specific question, with just a few exceptions, I give the Trump administration not just an A, but an A++++. They have been amazing. We are currently witnessing the greatest era of deregulation ever. Okay, and I don't make that comparison to Reagan or anyone else, it's ever. And part of that is because the Trump administration had a great amount to work with when it came into office, given its predecessors. But you may remember in his first State of the Union, the president promised that he would eliminate 2 regulations for any new one that was created. By the latest statistics, which I just got from the OMB before I showed up here, that ratio currently stands at 22 eliminated to 1.
Now, in 1948, there was a fascinating book came out by Major Racy Jordan, in which he talked about American aid to the communists as far as their ability to build nuclear weapons. Did you ever have an opportunity of verifying the facts that we had given them the heavy water, we'd given them the wherewithal to build their atomic weapons?
Well, as part of the work I was doing at Stanford, I did investigate the shipping documents for Lend-Lease, and I took a sample of these documents and I checked them against Major Jordan. And broadly, Major Jordan was correct within, say, about 5%. And Major Jordan, of course, made the charge that we had shipped materials to the Soviets, 1944, 1945, which were later used in their atomic program. There is no doubt he is correct. We shipped heavy water, which is essential, but we shipped other items which are perhaps less obvious to the layman. We shipped, for example, aluminum tubes, and aluminum tubes are essential for atomic energy development. We shipped graphite, and graphite is another essential component. So generally, as far as I could check, and I checked the original government Lend-Lease document, General Major Jordan was correct. Standard Oil, General Electric, and possibly Osram were contributors. Even in 1944, in the middle of World War II, we find that ITT was funneling funds to Heinrich Himmler's fund through Schroeder, who was the chairman of the ITT subsidiaries in Germany. We also find that DEPAG, the Standard Oil subsidiary in Germany, was financing Heinrich Himmler, and this was in the middle of World War II.
Now, were these facts ever brought out at the Nuremberg hearings?
They were never brought out at the Nuremberg hearings, although the documents do exist within the files, within the records. They have not been published, as far as I know.
And you actually had access to these records?
Yes, there's some 400 tons of these records available, and many of them were at the Hoover Institution, or copies were at the Hoover Institution, and that's where I found the original documentation.
I think it's a tragic part of our history when the American public doesn't realize the interplay then between great American corporations and the financing, the funding of the Nazi movement. Now, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Nuremberg Trials, because at the Nuremberg Trials, the Nazis, the Nazi war criminals, the Nazi generals were held specifically guilty for what transpired. Were there any Americans involved? Were any Americans indicted? Were any Americans convicted as far as the financing of the Nazi war movement?
Very definitely not.
The very title of your book asserts that America's been in denial, that China has a secret strategy to replace the United States. What is that strategy based on?
The strategy is based on two things. First, China's historical role in what we would today call the leader of the world. They want to restore themselves to the role they played for 2,000 years. The second part of the strategy is they know from their economists that they can't build China into a replacement for us by themselves. They've got to get certain things from the outside world, and they've worked very hard in the last 30 years to get those things.
And is that so surprising?
It's surprising because they have denied publicly such an ambition. They portray themselves as weak, backward, and in great need of assistance from us.
And the United States has been a very willing partner in assisting them.
Yes, because of false assumptions. We thought, going back 30 or 40 years ago, if China becomes prosperous, the middle class will demand democracy. And so we'll be looking at a country that, yes, is stronger, but it has our values. That didn't happen. That's what I call the greatest intelligence failure in our history.
But there are other countries in the world that consider themselves great historical powers and want to restore that greatness. What makes China, as you portray it, so malevolent or so inimical to U.S. interests?
I think it's the unreformed China that I'm worried about. They plan to keep the Communist Party's structure, the approach to human rights, the approach to pollution. They plan to keep all that and become the dominant economic power. This is what I'm warning against.
But wasn't it inevitable, given China's size and its resources, its population, that it was bound to grow by leaps and bounds? It didn't need the United States for that.
No, they did need us for that. It's very clear from their own writings. They believe that roughly half their growth over the last 30 years was brought about by favorable terms of trade and investment from America. We're crucial to their strategy.
Now, you yourself made a personal evolution. You say you used to be what's known in trade as a panda hugger.
Yes. A panda hugger that I was before is someone who uncritically just wants to help and support China, has a sense of the old, what I call the old narrative. I came to realize I've been wrong from the beginning about who was really managing whom in this relationship. We have, I hate to say, been their pawns because we've got a lot of benefit from our trade with China and our investment, and they have made some enormous progress. But I think overall, the Chinese are managing us much better than we are managing China.
Now, people who've looked at this book criticize it for relying way too much on the view of the hawks inside the defense and intelligence and military establishments, and that there are many other competing voices in the Chinese establishment. Aren't there?
Yes, that criticism is valid, but the rise of the hawks has happened. It's a fact. President Xi Jinping shows more attention to them, has involved them more in his deliberations, goes to meet with them in person. So I think the rise of the hawks that I'm claiming has taken place is not up for debate. It's happened for sure.
But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion, or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C.
Our country needs us, and we need people like George Soros.
What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order.
Is there going to be sort of a tipping point, a moment at which the dollar is fatally weakened, or does it just sort of carry on?
An orderly decline of the dollar is actually desirable. A decline in the value of the dollar is necessary in order to compensated for the fact that the U.S. economy will remain rather weak, will be a drag on the global economy. China will emerge as the motor replacing the U.S. consumer. And of course it's a smaller motor because the Chinese economy is much smaller. So the world economy will have less of a motor. So it will move forward slower than it has.
If the value of the dollar declines, our standard of living will plummet. Some Chinese factory workers work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They live in dormitory rooms with 6 other people. You do not want what George Soros wants for us. George Soros heavily funds politicians that align themselves with his plans. Open borders. It is time for Americans to throw the new left under the bus.
Well, last year, criminal justice policies changed dramatically in the city of Philadelphia after a new DA, Larry Krasner, took office. He was backed by George Soros, and Krasner massively scaled back law enforcement in the city. Prosecutors stopped prosecuting numerous crimes. They stopped seeking cash bail for even some felonies. They deliberately imposed shorter prison sentences. Dozens of prosecutors were fired. So what happened? Cause and effect? Well, the most murders in a decade. We spoke recently with the president of Philadelphia's Fraternal Order of Police, John McNesby, and here's what he told us. Mr. McNesby, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So Philadelphia got a new district attorney, as we just said, with the backing of George Soros. He made changes to the way that crimes are prosecuted in Philadelphia. What was the result?
Well, the result is that I said at this time last year that crime would be through the roof. Excuse me, over the last year, there's been 6,500 less cases brought before the Criminal Justice Center here. Crime is up. 4,000 felons are on the streets running the city of Philadelphia. And it's, you know, everybody's pointing the fingers to police officers, to the police commissioner. And the fact of the matter is we're out doing the job. He's decimated the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. He has a great disdain and dislike for law enforcement. He let go of many prosecutors his first weekend, 31 to be exact. There's a 30% turnover rate. So all that while we're out there trying to protect the community.
So an ideologue comes in with left-wing backing and guts the criminal justice system, crime rises, and then the police get blamed for it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, everybody's pointing the fingers at what's the police going to do, what's the police commissioner going to do. Fact of the matter is, we have officers out there arresting people on a daily basis, and they're walking out the back of police stations. He's cutting deals with defense attorneys. He's cutting deals, one just a couple weeks back, where a felon who had 14 priors goes into a store, shoots the owner with an AK-47, and he cuts a deal without the victim knowing for 3.5 to 10 years. I mean, that's insane, and that's not happening once or twice. It's happening so many times now that the judges in the city of Philadelphia are getting wind of it, and they're starting to check and double check and triple check these deals.
What's the motive here? I mean, to the extent we know, why would a district attorney want to let felons out of prison and give lighter sentences to people who commit violent gun crime? Why?
Well, he's actually, previously he was a defense attorney. He filed before taking office, and I think he's turned the district attorney's office into the Defender Association. I think he forgot the oath that he had taken to uphold the law and enforce the law in the city, but he was prior a defense attorney and sued the city and the Philadelphia Police Department over 70 times during his tenure. On top of that, he has now a do not call list where he has not 1, 2, 3, 10 officers on. He has a few hundred officers on this list, and I don't know how, or he's not explaining how officers get on that list, get off the list, what's the just cause of being put on the list. He's running his own show here, and it's like a carnival act.
What's the effect on poor neighborhoods in the city?
Well, it's not. I think everybody's catching wind now that it's not just. It's not just the victims of these crimes, although that's very, very important because he's not letting them know anything. Now it's the community that are seeing people run rampant in their neighborhoods, shoot at each other, whether it's poor, whether it's affluent. It really doesn't matter. It's across the city of Philadelphia. They're not picking and choosing. These aren't people that you let out. And we're all for, reform. And we're open-minded. But the fact of the matter is when you let 4,000 felons out on the street, they're not going back and getting jobs anywhere that are really that make any sense. They're back out doing what they did to put them in jail, and that's hurting the community.
The enemies of civilization, for sure. Thanks very much for telling us what's going on in Philadelphia. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
You got it.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. Our planet is going to be a disaster if we don't turn this ship around. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And this is the war. This is our World War II.
After your movie An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, you made the following comments as part of your publicity for the movie. You said, unless we took, quote, drastic measures, the world would reach a point of no return within 10 years, and you called it a true planetary emergency. We're 11 years later. No. Weren't you wrong?
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.